Washington.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My bipartisan amendment would prevent funding from this bill to be used to carry out the Defense Department's, quote, unfunded priorities list. This list that the DoD is required to send to Congress is simply a wish list of things that individual commanders and generals would like to fund, and by definition have been determined non-essential to our national security. This practice does not serve the national security interests of the United States, and in fact, it was not mandatory until the passage of the fiscal 17 NDAA. Mandating these wish lists only serves special interests in the defense contractor industry, eager to grow their profits by selling expensive equipment that were not important enough to make it into the Pentagon's own budget. This is corruption and a waste of taxpayer dollars. The practice has long been criticized by DoD officials and lawmakers of both parties. Bush-appointed Defense Secretary Robert Gates all but banned the list, strongly discouraging his generals from submitting wish lists to Congress during his tenure. And Senator John McCain, chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, publicly stated his skepticism of the practice. In fact, in response to a letter that I sent to the Department of Defense on this practice, Undersecretary of Defense Michael McCord said on behalf of Defense Secretary Austin, and I'm quoting, "Therefore, the Department supports your proposal to repeal the requirement in 10 U.S.C. 222A, and that is to send Congress an unfunded priorities list." These wish lists are packed with billions of dollars of excessive line items, this year totaling more than $17 billion, on top of the $842 billion requested by the White House. The Space Force alone requested $500 million in unfunded priorities, almost all classified. Meanwhile, we cannot verify that the money that we authorize for DoD is even spent responsibly because the Department of Defense has never passed a budget audit. I urge my colleagues, especially those across the aisle who are interested in fiscal conservatism, to vote yes on this bipartisan and common sense amendment. And I want to thank my Republican colleagues, Congressman McClintock and Congressman Davidson, as well as members of my own party, Congressman Garamendi and Congressman Moulton, who understand that this is wrong, and they have worked in concert with me to rein in this wasteful spending that has no benefit to our national security. Madam Speaker, I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I claim time in opposition.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in opposition to the amendment. Unfunded priority lists are a critical tool to provide Congress with unfiltered information on what the military services and combatant commanders need. Access to this information is so important that FY17 National Defense Authorization Act established a statutory requirement. Unfunded priority lists give our military services and combatant commanders a direct channel to Congress, which allows Congress to make more informed decisions. I would just say, for instance, Indo-PACOM obviously has challenges dealing with China, and we unfortunately are constrained by our budget not to get the resources there that they would like to have, but if in fact resources come available, we'd like to take care of those combatant commanders to deal with the threats that they have. So I would urge opposition to this amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California yields back. The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield as much time as she would like to consume to our top Democrat on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, Betty McCollum.
The gentlewoman has 2.5 minutes remaining.
Okay. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I rise in support of my colleague's amendment. We all support funding for our national security, but should any department, any agency, or any entity really get an opportunity to request additional funding outside of the President's request and administration's request? The service chiefs appear before the committee each year to discuss how their budgets, needs included in the National Defense Strategy. Most of the battalion commanders testify before committees also. So Congress is able to assess with strength and oversight what we believe the needs are for our country and for its national security. With the levers that we have in place, I support our colleagues, my colleague's amendment, and I would urge others to support it, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now yield to Representative Chuy Garcia of Illinois.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I understand that we're living in uncertain times. We are witnessing an unjustifiable war of aggression in Ukraine and a global democratic backslide. But Congress can respond to national security needs as they arise. We don't have to spend billions of dollars on what ifs. These risks are already built into the Pentagon's budget request. But if military leaders want more funding for their wish list, there is nothing in this amendment that will prevent DoD from supplying an unfunded priorities list to Congress, but this process should be optional, just as it was 7 years ago. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The time is controlled by the gentlewoman from Washington.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this letter from Undersecretary of Defense Michael McCord that I quoted earlier.
The gentlewoman's request will be covered by general leave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I will just close out by saying that we know that the Department of Defense is necessarily a hierarchical institution where the top leaders identify the most important priorities across a very vast swath of departments within the Department of Defense. And they are the ones who we charge and who we confirm, frankly, to be in charge of that appropriations request and that budget. What is happening now with this unfunded priorities list, and we've had testimony on this in the Budget Committee and other committees, is that these lists are just coming up from people who simply do not have any authority to determine the importance. So I urge adoption of the amendment, and I yield back.